Hello class, my name is Timothy Kim and I'll be talking to you today about the Sophists. So exactly what are they? From what I read and understood, I'd like to think that they were intellectual mercenaries for hire, similar to how Blackwater, contracts out soldiers. They contracted themselves out you know, to teach. Before I talk about the Sophists, I really want to talk about how they came to be, and to do that, we need to take a look at the Sophos. Well, you see, the Sophos were revolutionary thinkers of their time who questioned nearly everything. They emphasized asking questions about natural processes as well as their origins and the meaning of life. They devoted themselves to questions that were already answered either through the religion or the mythology, or they even asked questions about questions that were supposed to be unanswerable. They were seen as like a prophet, priest, therapist combination, and because of the questioning that they did, there's no doubt that they were, not philosophical, but rather they were not described as philosophers per se, because the Sophists were actually regarded as the wise men or the sages, and philosophers were just seen as eccentric thinkers and truth seekers. Actually, the earliest Western philosophers were the pre-Socratics. The pre-Socratics actually busied themselves in their interest of explanation, and through that interest, they shaped the development of reason. How they did that was they just questioned the logical consistency as well as the so-called standards of knowledge of the time. Often, though, their pre-Socratics reasoning often did not match up with the observed facts from Heraclitus, who said that things would appear to remain the same and that change alone was unchanging, and Parmenides, who speculated that change and variety are not real but only appearances. Such reasoning actually left a lot more confused than enlightened to that kind of reason. But you're probably wondering, how does this all lead to the development of the Sophists? Well, it's because of ancient Athens. You see, the Athenians were very ethnocentric, and I'm sure you've already read it, but I'm going to just tell you anyway, which means that they held the belief that their customs and beliefs were superior to all others. Now, as people from other places came to Athens, people from, let's say, Persia or Sparta or Miles, these people, as they started to come in higher numbers, they began to shake the whole foundation of Athenian society. Whereas previously you had to be born into the right family, you had to have a lot of money, and then that's when you were actually affluent and influential in Athenian society. Now, with the higher influx of foreigners, diligence and hard work was actually beginning to be as important as being born in the right family. And as these people became more prominent in the Athenian society, they were able to have more rights, and they were actually able to speak in front of the Athenian assembly regardless of birth. And as higher numbers of people went into the Athenian assembly, the ability to think clearly and present your case persuasively meant that you were either going to be successful in the political arena and improve your status, or just stay in the lower rungs of society. Now, to attain the skills of being able to think and persuade, education was needed, and that is where the Sophists came in. The Sophists were the first professional teachers, and they taught what they knew for extravagant fees. They taught that nothing was good nor bad, but rather that good and bad were perceptions based on the custom and the preference that the person held, or that the society that culture that person was from held. They also believed that power was the ultimate value, and that right and wrong were negligible as long as you were able to get your own way. Furthermore, they were the first philosophers to come to the conclusion that the truth is actually just relative, thus creating the concept of relativism, which is the belief that knowledge is determined by specific qualities of the observer. Cultural relativism can either be cultural or individual. Cultural relativism is the belief that all values are culturally determined and that these values aren't magically given to you by some deity or created by nature and you happen to find it in the wilderness, but rather these values they develop with the customs and the preferences of the culture that the person is associated with. Individual relativism is a bit more extreme in that it states that each individual's experiences and preferences shape that individual's perception of right and wrong. Of the Sophists, Protagoras was actually one of the greatest. He traveled to many different places and noted the differences of each culture while noticing that they all held on to the belief that their culture was better than others. Based upon his observations and travels, Protagoras concluded that morals were nothing more than the product of a certain society. He also theorized that an individual's values were determined by the culture, experience, and biopsychology. The ideas that he had sparked the term pragmatism, meaning ideas have meaning or truth value to the extent that they produce practical results and effectively further our aims. In addition, he also reasoned that the best thing to do is to accept the customs and beliefs of your own community because behaving in the most common way actually gives you the most social power. Now, there was a next generation of sophists, and Protagoras is actually really tame compared to these guys. The next generation of sophists carried relativism to a whole new level with moral realism, a pragmatic social philosophy free from moral considerations. Moral realists theorized that the laws of every society turned out to reflect the interests of those in power. Regardless of what the average person believes to be right, that average person is actually very powerless to go against those in power and end up obeying the laws already set in place. A great example of this would be if, let's say, us students had a disagreement with our philosophy teacher. Ah! If we disagreed and we brought it up, he has the most power, and thus by him having the power, his interpretation is actually more correct than ours. I'm just kidding, Professor. I'm kidding. But aside from that little tangent, some people don't like to be oppressed. The perfect example is given by Caligula. He made his own version of moral realism, which goes by many different names: the doctrine of the superior individual, the true man, the natural man, etc., etc. It's very elitist and individualistic, but not necessarily racial. Caligula reasoned that the superior individual did not become that way due to cultural socialization, but rather through his or her own individual virtues and traits. Caligula asserts that in nature the strongest dominate the weak, and morality actually attempts to restrain the truly powerful individual. As such, to sophists such as Caligula's, power is the highest value, and the superior and more powerful individual is justified by nature's rules to take over the weak. Furthermore, such sophists state that humans, just like animals, are created no more equal than all animals are. Now that I've completed my spiel on the sophists, how they came to be, and what specific philosophies they adopted into their beliefs, or what kind of philosophies they theorized of, I'd like to ask you just 3 little questions for discussion. First off, do you regard the sophists to be influential to society in terms of free thinking, or were they catalysts for the degradation of morals in society, and why? My second question is, when is ethnocentrism ever justified? Or is it ever justified? And lastly, how have the sophists contributed to modern society? That's for you guys to discuss, but I'll be there every step of the way. This is my first movie I've ever made on iMovie, so hopefully it went well. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Bye.